All right. Thank you all for joining us today. How exciting to know so many friends and families, members are able to join us. Welcome to the Greenberg-Goldberg family reunion. Thank you all for being here. Mike Kelly has been a bridge builder, and we have honored him in the last year for his contributions to TriFaith, to Omaha, to be such an upstander in the work that we do. And so what a privilege to be able to have Mike here with me today and to share so much about this journey of more than a decade of doing this work. So Mike, I'll turn this over to you. And thank you so much for being here.
Well, Wendy, thank you very much. This is an honor to be able to talk with you. I've done a lot of interviews over the last, I guess, 11 years with TriFaith people when I was at the World-Herald, but I'm glad to get to talk with you today. Of course, we all know Wendy is our executive director of TriFaith Initiative. She's a founding board member, former president of Temple Israel. Maybe not everybody knows her Omaha background. Wendy Goldberg grew up as Wendy Greenberg, West Side High, went to University of Wisconsin, Syracuse University, where she excelled in public speaking. Not surprised to learn that, but left college before graduation and married David Goldberg. And so their wedding reception theme, of course, was green to gold. Pretty cute. Raised her kids, did a lot of volunteering, but then within the last decade or so went back and finished and got that bachelor's degree and a master's degree. She's worked in IT, she's worked in Project Harmony, became the assistant director of TriFaith Initiative, and now the executive director. Wendy, when you started these 4 previous sessions 4 weeks ago today, you started out by talking about the grandeur of the path we have taken, this experiment, this petri dish, and you called it audacious. I love that beginning. Whatever gave you and your colleagues the idea that you could pull this off?
Wow, what a big question to start with. I think that things are possible in Omaha, Nebraska, because of the generosity of the culture. And I witnessed in so many examples from my childhood to my adulthood that if you dream something and you can articulate it on a piece of paper, it's possible here. And that we can do this coming together of intention to complete whatever is something that you can put a frame around. And so I believe in the power of people coming together. Many people have asked me, lots of questions about my faith. And for me, the oneness that's represented in Judaism, in that idea of something bigger than any one of us, is that exact thing. So I think TriFaith is an expression of my understanding of godliness, that when we come together for good, that is the energy of something bigger than any one of us that some people call God.
Well, you use the word audacious, and certainly when I first learned of it, I thought, what? Boy, that's a great idea, but could they really pull that off? But that wasn't until 2009. And I learned through this recent Zoom series about Bob Freeman's walk. He went for a walk with his legal pad. Bob loves his legal pad, and really dreamed this idea of a TriFaith neighborhood. And then in 2006, the memorandum of understanding at Benson Public Library, none of this was made public. How did you keep it quiet, and why did you want to?
I don't know that I wanted to, and I don't know that I was responsible for keeping it quiet. I probably was more responsible for talking about it relatively publicly. Um, I, I think that this whole idea was built one relationship at a time. And so any idea where you would broadcast it beyond, to all of the congregation or such, I'm not sure people were ready for that kind of messaging. And so what happened is we had small group conversations, one conversation at a time, and it might have felt as if we weren't including more people because we were bridge building and trust building. And that's why it's been successful, that the process has been a marathon, not a sprint. And that in no turn have we ever thought that we were going to be able to change the hearts or minds of a mass of people. And that one person learning the narrative of another was how we were going to build success around this.
And TriFaith, of course, didn't invent interfaith connection and communication, but for what became TriFaith Initiative in Omaha, what were the kind of seeds for that? What went first?
Well, a formative seed was this idea of intentional neighborhood, that what we had at 70th and Cass Street, of the relationship with the First United Methodist Church and Omaha Community Playhouse was more than convenient. There was this overflow concept that if we outgrew the parking lot spaces that we need, we were welcome in the spaces that surrounded us. And I think we learned an awful lot from that. And so we wanted to recreate some of that. Intentional neighborhood space. What does it mean to know your neighbor? Who is your neighbor? And even though those partnerships weren't necessarily mission driven, what would it mean if we were intentional about having a similar mission to our neighbors, and how could a neighborhood come about around that? And then it was a chorus of voices, right? So what I envisioned that to be was different than what REA imagined that to be, or Bob, even just as the lens of Jewish leaders. And then as we invited more people in, I think we also made space for each person's vision, that there wasn't a monolith to this ever, that always there were so many opportunities for different people to live into what this could become in their own way, in their own time. And for some people it's taken longer, and for some people they were like, wow, this is my gig, I'm in.
And I've written over the years in the World-Herald, because it's such a wonderful story, that part of in the beginning, when Rabbi Azrael and some congregants on the day of 9/11 went to the mosque to protect or help discourage any possible vandals. But you were saying, when we talked the other day, that wasn't like the first time they'd met. There were things that went before that. Tell me about that.
So there were lots of efforts for, and under REA's leadership, for the Jewish community and the Muslim community to be in relationship and conversation with each other. And Shakil Ahmed was speaking to that work that started in the 1990s, 1992 as far back. And David and I have a friendly competition about who has been involved in this work longer. And if I'm being honest with all of you today, I will tell you that it's David that's been involved longer, because he was part of the committee from Temple that worked on that work in the 90s. And they had varying levels of success, because the leadership of both the synagogue, lay leadership of the synagogue that changes every 2 years, more or less interested in this kind of work as a priority, staff time and allocations, more or less interested in this work as a priority. And then from the Muslim community, they had a number of spiritual leader transitions, and those leaders over time were more or less interested in that work. And so what ended up happening, as we learned last week, is that a number of those leaders from the Muslim community created their own entity to say, we are empowered to do this work consistently, and we want to be in relationship with our brothers and sisters of other faiths.
But before the fall of 2005, when Bob Freeman went for the now famous walk, and kind of dreaming this up. Were there dreams of anything like this? What were you talking about in those days?
You know, I think we were talking about picnics and tech studies and cultural competence, and just having some idea of, and those things happen globally. You know, there are hundreds of thousands of organizations that do interfaith work around the common narrative of our stories. The thing that's special about this, that's audacious about this, is the coming together intentionally to raise $70 million to raise the bricks and mortar of 4 buildings and a bridge.
That'll never happen.
Right, exactly. And the idea of coming together in that way, you know, a part of the founding story was, if we could co-locate a church, a mosque, and a synagogue, that would be incredible. If we could build a 4th building where we could come together and welcome people in a shared effort, that would be beautiful. But if it was only a picnic table for us to gather around, that would be enough. And that was a very early image of how we thought about how we might come together to gather in spaces. And, you know, in light of COVID, thinking about how much safer it feels in this moment to gather around a picnic table, we just added picnic tables to the backyard of the TriFaith Commons, so that we can think about really gathering together around picnic tables, and are looking to do a public art initiative around that as well. So what's enough? And for a lot of people in other places, it's been enough to show up at a church, a mosque, and a synagogue and have a conversation and go home. And we decided that that wasn't enough for us. We wanted to live next door to each other. And like when the church opened, they hadn't unpacked all of their boxes and they couldn't find the coffee for the opening at the church. And I went over to Temple and borrowed the coffee filters and the coffee packages so that they could have coffee at their opening. Isn't that neighborly?
That's neighborly. And so Bob comes back with his legal pad full, and I assume you have a meeting. What was the first reaction when you brought this up?
So I got invited to lunch with Rabbi Azrael and Bob Friedman at a barbecue restaurant for lunch. I always think that's kind of an interesting place for 3 Jews to go have lunch to talk about interfaith work. But that's what we did. I remember it as clear as day, sitting there, and I was president of the congregation, and they pitched this idea. What if we go and look for partners to purchase land with? I'd been part of all of the small group conversations that had happened. I had some concerns over, I was the 4th president who was female of Temple Israel, and the youngest ever. And so an invitation for a woman to help lead and be part of that kind of conversation made me realize that the idea of Old Boys Club was out the window, and I was, you know, on the front line to get to decide whether or not I wanted to add energy to say yes to this. And I did immediately, and the rest is history, as they say.
Well, then between the Benson Public Library meeting and memorandum in 2006 and 2009, you obviously did a lot of work, most of it behind the scenes, I guess. I wasn't the religion writer for the World-Herald, but I guess I got a press release about something called Dinner at Abraham's Tent. Well, what tent is that going to be? And of course, it was at the time called Quest Center, I guess, and 1,100 people. And I made sure I went there. And I guess that is when I don't know if my editors would agree, sort of appointed myself the TriFaith reporter for the World-Herald, because this was such a great Omaha story, you know, with global implications, if you could actually pull it off, which of course you can't. And you did. Bob has used the term million to one shot. Let's think back to that night. 1,100 people there, Jews, Muslim, Christians. What's your best memory of that?
So prior to the dinner, we had an opportunity for shared worship. And so one of the things is that we wanted to be able to do it on a weekend night because we thought more people would show up if it was on a weekend night. And the spiritual leaders at Temple said that's Shabbat, and the only way we could do that is if we actually had Shabbat. So we couldn't just have Shabbat without having some expression of the other faith communities' worship. So we had 20 minutes of Shabbat, 20 minutes of an Episcopal version of an evening service, which they created for the moment because it doesn't really exist, and then a call to worship. And one of the things I learned earliest was from that particular occasion, and that's that we didn't try to weave together our traditions. We had 20 minutes of authentic prayer from each of the separate faith traditions, and we didn't ask anyone who was Christian to do the Jewish version or any other configuration of that. We just truly witnessed what is beautiful about each of those traditions in its own sacred container. And I think we need to continue to go back to that the times that we've tried to have an interfaith choir and find common language around that, celebrating what's different about us is the silver lining for me. Not all, and I appreciate that there are plenty of things that we have in common, but what is most beautiful is what is different. And so that was my first window into what was very, very powerful experience for me.
And so at the dinner at Abraham's tent, you had national leaders of the three faiths, but you also included teenagers from the three faiths and some of the kind of ceremonial things. And I remember talking to some people afterwards. Of course, I'm going around getting quotes, people saying, I never thought this would get this far. This is amazing. I guess that kind of inspired me. But I mean, that night, that first Abraham's tent, what did you feel like at the end of the evening?
I think in some of the video production that came around for that evening, I was quoted as saying, we could never build walls that could keep us safe tall enough, and instead we should build bridges of understanding, and that our children don't have these same fears that generations who come before us have had. And those words ring as true today, especially the conversations about building walls and as a form of security. I don't think that that's possible. I don't think that walls keep us safe. As a matter of fact, I think when we put up those boundaries between each other, that's where fear happens. And TriFaith Initiative, in all different facets, whether that's education or food or shared operations, are opportunities for us to take down those walls and to hear each other's narratives. And that event sold a lot of people, besides selling a lot of tickets, it sold a lot of people on the hope that's possible around this. And, you know, we were also in the middle of Obama as a president and the whole HOPE campaign in general. Yeah. So it was an opportunity for us all to live that expression of that campaign.
Not long after that, there was an op-ed piece in the World-Herald signed by yourself, Wendy, Rabbi Azriel, Nasser al-Sharif, and Canon Tim Anderson of the Episcopal Church, kind of laying out this dream. And it ended saying, how can we attempt a TriFaith initiative when there's a war going on in the Middle East? Of course, it ended, how can we not? It was a beautiful piece. But, you know, these things come up in the international news, the Middle East and elsewhere. Didn't you think that would be too much to overcome?
So in our early days, we had conversations about how political we wanted to be. I would say that meeting, which happened in Rabbi Azriel's study at the old building on 70th and Cass Street with the four of us, was an honor that I will, hold with me forever, to be able to hear the narratives of Nasser and Aryeh in particular, sharing the pain that both of their families have endured because of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, changed me as a human being from those hours, and inspired me to realize how much we can change by hearing the narrative of the religious other, right? That once we all humanize our experiences, we have so much more potential. Also, though, we realized as a board that we needed to decide as leaders when we need to say no and where the limits are. And we have said and continue to say that our focus is at 132nd and Pacific Street, and that we're trying to be relational and build these one at a time relationships. And that hasn't really changed. The thing that's probably changed is that we've articulated some items that we need to advocate for around religious freedom and vitality of our community and freedom of belief, issues of immigration and such that intersect with the conversation of religion. But initially, for the very formative years, we decided we were not going to take any strong stands. Some of the things that changed in terms of us feeling required to make public statements beyond that first initial op-ed piece was last year, when there was a number of incidents in houses of worship, violence in houses of worship in a row. And we made a statement, and after New Zealand, after Sri Lanka, after the Tree of Life incident, and those were so overwhelming to me and to the staff and to the board, partially because they started to take all of the oxygen of our energies to respond to what was wrong in the world. And we made a decision as leaders at that time, just even last year, to say we're not going to constantly make all these statements about condemning violence, because we need to realize that when we're making a statement about any one of those, there are 100 other incidents that we are not. And how do you decide when you do? Is it when 10 lives are affected, or 100 lives are affected, or it's within 25 miles of us, or where are the boundaries, because there's so much pain in our world? And so instead, we've really worked to focus on amplifying and being proactive about our message instead of reactive about our message. And so that's some of what we've learned through our growing process.
The TriFaith Initiative is not all like kumbaya, hugging all the time. In fact, I think Nasser resigned from the TriFaith board. At one point, did you, obviously, as in any group, there were some disagreements. Was that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Anything you can tell us about?
I will tell you that for all of the congregations, particularly those people who felt that they were leading with fear, and that fear is real, and there's a lot of uncertainty in our world, and there are people whose response to fear is to step away and to whether it's ignore or respond with strong emotion. Those days are hard, and we have a lot to learn from our congregants who have reservations, and certainly security is important, and fear happens, and we need to respond to those things. But I think in general, if it's not a fit, then it's not a fit. And sometimes people have to walk away, and that's what happened.
Well, I still am in awe of what TriFaith pulled off, if that's the right word. But not all Jewish people, not all Muslims, not all Christians thought this was a good idea. And yet it seems as though there wasn't much public pushback. Occasionally, I remember one guy it was, I think, said he was a former Muslim, now Christian, was speaking negatively. There was a rogue city council candidate made some stupid comments, but I don't remember that other than neighbors not wanting the trees being cut down, that you had a lot of pushback. Is that right or not?
I think there continues to be pushback. I think that the rise of white supremacy, the divisions that are polarizing, that are religious and political right this minute, are representative of the pushback. You know, we might not see it in our backyard, and we have a lot of people who are really proud that this is something that's happening in Omaha, or this is something that's happening that Temple Israel or AMI or Countryside Community Church is a partner in. And I have a lot of friends who say, I'm so glad you're doing this work, Wendy, but don't necessarily show up to participate in the work. So different people have different hesitations. The work calls to different people on different days. And I'm hopeful that the good that will come will continue to be contagious. Early in my years as program director, Cy Wakeman, who's a leadership developer in Omaha and has written a number of books that have gotten national attention, spoke to a women's group at Temple and talked about the resistors and said, you know, don't pay attention to the resistors. They're always going to be there. Lean into those people who believe this is possible. And, you know, I think that's what we've all done. We've acknowledged and paid tribute to try to give venue for people who disagree to feel heard. And that's important. And when we disagree, we often grow and be able to say, help me understand why you feel so passionately about this. We have a lot to learn from people that we disagree with. And so that's an important part of the work that we're going to continue to do.
Well, I'm proud of Omaha, I guess I'd say, that there wasn't a lot of pushback, even from people who wouldn't necessarily agree or think this was a good idea. I think that they saw it was pretty inspirational. Or maybe they just thought you would never pull it off. And then you do. You mentioned 132nd and Pacific, just south of there, which turned out to be a wonderful location. But as we learned from John Wildbaum, you knew, but what I learned a couple weeks ago, there were 36 properties that were looked at, and until this turned out to be the one, and it's kind of appropriate. This was part of the site of the former Jewish country club when Jews couldn't get in the other ones. I feel a lot of fun writing about Hell Creek running through the middle of it. Of course, you didn't name it Heaven's Bridge after all, but Abraham's Bridge is a great name for it. But there was, besides all these sort of spiritual and sometimes political discussions you were having, there was all these logistics going on. And what were those years like? Did it seem like you wouldn't find a location, or were you confident that you would?
Depends what day you asked, but I think we've been patient. I guess that would be another key to the success, was that we had time, and we still have time, and that we never thought that the changes, the systematic changes that are necessary for this work to be successful had to be done by a week from next Tuesday. And, you know, there were things that needed, that we had goals that we set for ourselves and continue to for completion. But even if I look back through some of our grant requests to some of our funders for the capital campaign, you know, we said we'd like to get these dollars, and we anticipate the fourth building will be completed in 2016. And then there's a memo that says it looks like it's going to be 17. I mean 18. I mean 19. You know, that and we were okay with what was, and because it moved slowly, there was space for change also. So like the configuration of the bridge is a beautiful thing that changed because time happened. And when our Christian partner changed and they had a different vision for how their building on the commons might be in proximity to the others, and then they came forward with an idea for how a bridge might connect us in a circle that was not in the cards before. And so we've been really open to what presents itself to us, what's unfolded. And the same's true for this moment that we're in right now. We have this moment where we have these 4 incredible buildings that are generally closed, right? And so what is that begging us to ask ourselves about how we are in relationship with each other and being neighbors to each other when we can't come together physically? And so we're just keep getting these tests.
I want to get into some of the really fun, happy things that have happened. I've got some examples I want to ask you about. But before we do that, since we're talking about logistics, the fundraising, oh my gosh. Did each congregation do its own fundraising? How did that all work?
So each congregation is responsible for doing its own fundraising. Each congregation is responsible for it being its own autonomous organization. The vitality of those 3 congregations is of utmost importance to the collaboration, but it's not the responsibility of the board. And I think one of the things that's most complicated about that is when we sit in board meetings and have conversations, whether or not board members are able to wear a hat that is putting the initiative in a priority to their own congregation or their own lived experience. And I personally have changed hats so many times. That's hard for me sometimes to even know which hat I have on in the conversation. I'm gonna mute a few of you here. I didn't mean to mute you, Mike, sorry. If you could mute yourself, if you have some background noise, that we would appreciate it. Sorry, I got disrupted. So could you perhaps ask the question one more time? Oh, now Mike is muted, 1 second. Go ahead.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes.
But Temple of Israel was going to go west, regardless if this happened, right? So that's kind of why the temple got built first. There had already been some fundraising going on through the years, I presume.
Oh, right. So each congregation kind of created a case statement for why they wanted to be part of this, how they would appeal to their potential funders, and each did their own fundraising. They also each created their own building without any oversight from the TriFaith board. There's some intention to have some common look and feel, but it was not dictated in any way by board members from TriFaith. Everyone trusted that each building would come together in its own way. And the reality that none of the buildings have a mortgage is such a testament to both the work that we're doing and all the players who made it happen.
Was this money all raised in Omaha?
I do know about a $10 donation that came internationally. I'm told that it was from a 10-year-old. I can't remember the country of origin, and it's a young person who learned about the work and sent their donation. But in general, it's my understanding that all of the money has come from Omaha.
Okay, we've talked about over the years about the question, why Omaha of all places? And there are some people from elsewhere that have asked that question. Wow, Omaha, who would have thought? Is one of the reasons because of the wealth that is in Omaha?
I think that's entirely possible. You know, the foundations that have given us time and talent, Andy Holland and her parents, may their memory be a blessing, believed in REA and believed that this dream was possible, and they put quite a bit of strength behind that. And Andy sits on our board. Susie Buffett as well is a member of Countryside and sits on the TriFaith board and is an incredible supporter of this work. And so, and then the other thing is that as I've become executive director and kind of listened to the thread of other nonprofit executives who don't always have nice things to say about their board engagement, we have such a different experience with that. And I probably have a different appreciation for it because I was a board member before I was executive director. But the unique talents that each of the board members bring, whether it's their skills in site development or legal, or Dr. Ali Khan currently in terms of public health and how incredibly supportive he's been to us. Marianne Stevens in her big picture visioning of education and the collaboration between faith communities and being inspired by divine spirit to do this kind of work. You know, I could go on and mention each of the 25 people who sit on the board and the unique talents that each of them bring. It's really a treasure. And often boards have, you know, a third of the people who are really engaged and a third who are kind of complacent and a third who don't even show up. We rarely have absences from our board meetings, and the engagement level, both financially and of time and talent, is exceptional.
As a Catholic, I was very pleased when Dr. Stevens was serving as chairman of the board. Have you had cooperation from the Catholic Church or Catholic people through the years, even though they're not part of the
so, you know, part of our story is that we went to the Catholic diocese first to be a partner, and it didn't work out. It wasn't part of the legacy of the leadership of the Catholic diocese at that time. Currently, I think we're working hard on building our relationships and appreciating that the social capital that faith leaders have in Omaha to impact change and to help address the needs of the marginalized communities that we are seeing their pain uncovered in unprecedented ways as a result of COVID, that we need to be in dialogue with those people, and that our voices join together with our public officials and other nonprofits. And this is a moment to do that, and the leadership at the Catholic diocese has been particularly receptive to that.
I took early retirement from the World-Herald about a year and a half ago at age 70. And I have thought, especially listening to some of your sessions the last 4 weeks, I wish I was still writing a column, because I would write about that. And a couple of things I wanted to mention from last week, just two charming stories that I would have put in my column and run them down and get all the background facts. But Kareem was talking about that a medical professional from Mayo Clinic was being recruited to Omaha, presumably UNMC, I'm guessing. And someone said, yeah, you ought to go out and see this TriFaith campus. And he calls, remember this story, and he calls his wife and says, I just found a place where I want to spend the rest of my life. Oh my gosh, very great story. And then Nuzat Mahmoud told the great story of meeting with, she'd had a number of meetings with Rabbi and Reverend Ernesto Medina, and then she married, became pregnant, and they right away said, we're going to throw a baby shower. And I loved her quote. She said, I must have been the only Muslim girl in the world that had a baby shower thrown by a rabbi and a minister. Have you had a lot of other like moments like that where you could just feel people coming together?
Yes. And I hope that everyone on this call and everyone who has an opportunity to participate in anything we do has one of those moments. You know, that's the work that we have ahead of us. We've built this, you know, bricks and mortar, and we have buildings, and that's not enough. The next layer is, how do we bring more and more people into the dialogue to realize that it's those moments of aha that are why we're doing this.
And at the second Abraham's tent a year or so ago, you did a wonderful job emceeing all that, but you had the Jewish and Muslim comedians, and that was great. Wasn't that was last year, right?
It was 2018.
And okay. Anyway, Imam Jamal was very interesting last week, by the way, talking about how their congregation, how it's grown at the American Muslim Institute. And I think he said from 32 nationalities. I mean, that's a little melting pot in and of itself. But anyway, this comedian, Muslim comedian, was talking about he realized that the building, the now, what do we call it now, the convention center, is the home of the Metropolitan Entertainment and Convention Authority, Mecca. Of course, sounds like the Islamic holy city. He said, yeah, I saw a sign that said Mecca that way. Hey, Mom, you are doing a great job. You know, with all the serious things that we need to discuss and are going on in the world, those moments, I think, just lift people up. So that's my little comment. So now, let's see, we've got about a little over 15 minutes to go. I've heard you use the term TriFaith 2.0. You got this campus amazingly built, and what is tomorrow? You get the certificate of occupancy on the Interfaith building, is that right? And then you're going to have a ceremony in October if things go well. But after that, then what does TriFaith do?
So just to place a pause in that moment, the concept that the TriFaith Initiative had a mission since 2006 when we were established to co-locate a church, a mosque, and a synagogue with an interfaith center. I don't personally know of another nonprofit in the life of their organization who can say we have accomplished our mission. You know, you spend so much time writing a mission statement to be able to check the box and say, we have completed that mission. Wow. And thank you to all who have made that possible. Now, the exciting piece is then we as leaders, both staff and clergy and board, have the complicated task to decide post co-location, what do we want to be? And we're working on that. It's a work in progress, but we did just pass a new mission statement, which I can read to you. Is inspired by the faiths of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim congregations, we cultivate inclusive environments to advance interfaith understanding and relationships. And the idea here is that we acknowledge that what's happening on the TriFaith Commons is a model, and we want it to be a best practice model. We want to be able to have given other people who would like to do this kind of work a toolkit that they can use so that they can replicate this model with our support in other places and also in other sectors. So we know that as the religious landscape shifts and perhaps affiliation in houses of worship is less popular, that people meet the religious other in the workplace, they meet the religious other in higher education, they meet the religious other in prisons. And so there and other spots. And so we have the opportunity to bring some bridging skills that we've learned through our own experimentation by documenting how we've been successful. How do we increase religious literacy? How do we increase someone's feeling of warmth towards the religious other? And we're doing research around that as well. And we hope that we're able to teach others that they will come to the TriFaith Commons to visit, to celebrate Omaha, to add to our economy, but also to appreciate that how we are living into our faiths as congregations and as the initiative is inspiring, and that we can be a resource and a trainer in several sectors so that people can appreciate the intersection of identity that includes the religious other.
Jean Gordon has a great comment on the chat line. Did you see that? Thank you, Jean. Just for most of my adult life, I felt that I have PTCD, post-traumatic church syndrome. This effort has made me think that I could overcome this. From the beginning, one of the rules or principles was there's no proselytizing in between. I don't suppose you've recruited anybody from the Christian or the Muslims to come over, have you? Why was that important to have that principle laid out?
Well, it's important to appreciate that we each have our own authentic expression of faith. And so I think we are learning, or my personal experience with this is that sometimes the judgments that come around this are harder in our own insular work than in our relationship with the other faith communities. So it's harder for sometimes the spectrum of Jewish identity to appreciate my version of Judaism, which is very different than perhaps my rabbi's or my cousin's version of Judaism. And so our idea here is that we want to create a safe space that feels inclusive for people to invite their religious expression as acceptable. And there are expressions in all of our faiths where isn't present, and we want to be a counter to that.
We had a question sent in beforehand from Brian Zakim. A serious question. In this year of U.S. national elections, the global COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the pressing climate crisis, what are the 3 priorities for interreligious social justice? You know what that refers to?
I think so. So, you know, as a staff, as a board, we've been having really meaningful conversations around our strategic planning. And we've been thinking about, as we respond to the need for spiritual wellness and people needing to gather together apart, how do we contribute to the greater good related to that? So spiritual wellness in general is a very first priority for us, that we want to isolate the virus, not people, right? And so how do we help to do that and contribute to that during COVID? We also know that not everyone has been impacted by the virus equitably. And this is not news. This is just an uncovering. So there's a process of lamentation around that. How do we look and grieve about, together, about the pain that exists in our society? And then how do we educate people in order to inspire them to respond? And how do we give people a venue for common action? So there's a lot of process questions in there. I am a process person, I admit to that. So that's me speaking to the process. And past the process, we have questions about what are we prioritizing? We are prioritizing growth and vitality of our community, meaning that we want to respond to what's happening in North and South Omaha to make Omaha a better place. And how do we use the social capital of clergy in order to educate people in other parishes about services that are available in light of this virus and this reality. Further, we care deeply about religious freedom and the freedom of belief. And so that's a priority for us. How do we define religious freedom? How is that counter to other religious narratives who have perhaps hijacked those words and use them with definitions that don't align with our understanding of religious freedom? And also issues around religious and racial discrimination. How can we care about those and uplift the voices of people? This isn't mission creep. This isn't us being the be all and end all to fix these problems that exist in the world, but how can we amplify the voices and find this collaborative impact by working with faith communities across Omaha and beyond to fix all that ails our world, because we are called to do this work, because all of our faiths teach that this work is particularly important. It impacts, the immigration system and refugees. That's a piece, as well as hunger and homelessness, eviction. And again, we can't do all this work, but we have so many voices of our congregants and our stakeholders and people who say that this work is important. How can we all be called into the work and each of us find our lane to contribute? And so we're trying to help people realize that through their work with TriFaith, whether that's getting out the vote or showing up to vote, all of those things are important parts of what our faith calls us to do. And Abrahamic faiths in particular, and I'm not saying that's to the exclusion of any other faith or of someone who is not affiliated with faith. Clearly, there are lots of rubrics for which people find a moral compass, but we feel uniquely qualified to amplify some of those voices through our work.
You have a beautiful Hindu temple just a few blocks to the south.
And a group of about 40 of us took a field trip there
We did.
A couple months ago.
Wow.
So, the idea is that in order for us to understand how to exist in a world in which there are lots of different world traditions, we want to learn about those so that we understand the container in which we exist.
I kind of am disappointed, just personally, that there hasn't been more sort of national attention on the TriFaith in Omaha. Remember, there was was it the Comedy Central? Was it that did the a rabbi, a minister, and an imam walked into a bar? That was kind of cute, but it was a little bit sillier. I thought you could have done it humorously and gotten the serious point across a little bit better. Dan Simon from CNN, Omaha guy originally, did a nice piece, and I think there's been some others. A national award last fall from Reformed Judaism nationally. I know you're not beating your chest and say look at us, but you mentioned wanting to be a model. Would you like there to be, and would you welcome people from around the country or the world coming in to study in Omaha?
So Syed Muhaddin was very interested in this concept forever, and he was one of the founders of the American Muslim Institute and a cardiologist from Creighton who is integral in all of this work. And his vision from an early time has been around other people coming to study with and about the work that we're doing. Clearly, this is a priority for us. It's part of our strategic vision. And figuring out how to get others to pay attention. One of the silver linings of COVID was that we canceled our fundraiser on March 16th, but held it virtually on April 3rd with Priya Parker. And she spoke to how to gather together while apart and thinking about virtually connecting. And we learned an awful lot. We used that moment to invite in the national movements of the Reform Movement for Judaism, the UCC Church, together with also a number of other national partners like Religions for Peace and others. And that grew our list. And we had over 1,000 people register from that, from the UK, from Canada. A number of those people have started to show up at a number of our events. So it's happening organically. And I think that's how for the next year to 3 years, we anticipate it happening. It's not necessarily our primary audience, but we acknowledge that people are banging at the door to witness and be part of this work. And that's exciting.
Well, it was wonderful that Countryside Church came in and became the Christian partner when the Episcopal Church decided it couldn't. Also very touching that members of the Episcopal Diocese donated $500,000 just recently. How big a disappointment was that to you and others that the Episcopal Diocese had to drop out?
I don't think I would lead with saying disappointment was the formative part of that experience for me. I am so grateful for the relationship that I continue to have with leaders from the Episcopal Diocese, and I think want to pay honor to the grace in which they stepped aside. And I think that's an example for us to realize that perhaps that's harder than having stayed and not been prepared to have the capacity to build the church. And so there's just so much blessing in the relationship there. I had a beautiful conversation with Bishop Scott Barker this week, dreaming about how we start to make space for faith communities who want to be engaged in this work, like the Episcopal Diocese, whether that's on the diocese level or on a parish level or on individual level, about dreaming about any person who wants to be part of this work or institution that wants to uphold the values of TriFaith. The TriFaith Board is working on creating a new memorandum of understanding for partners beyond the founding partners. And so what might that look like? That's what TriFaith 2.0, as you said, will unfold and tell us.
Well, this has been great to be with you and to get to ask you questions again, and just to talk about TriFaith. It's amazing. I'm very proud of Omaha and what all of you have done. I still can't almost believe it. $70 million, and when I'm in town, whenever I just drive past there, it's kind of thrilling. You still look at it like that, or are you too deeply involved in it?
No, as a matter of fact, this week I have had the privilege to spend quite a bit of time in the TriFaith Center. And when you walk into the TriFaith Center and you enter from the west doors and you walk in, the entire back wall of the TriFaith Center is window. And it opens up to the bridge and the expansive view of wildlife and buildings and people milling about on the bridge. And it just inspires me to realize that the best is yet to come.
Well, that's great. Well, congratulations to you, Wendy, and all of the people who've worked on this over the years. It's really amazing. So our hour is about over, and I'll hand it back to you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you all for being here. I will send out a recording, so if you missed any part or would like to share it with others, that will come out later this afternoon. I will tell you that in August, we are changing up the format for these noon open heart sessions a little bit. They'll be every other week. On August 13th, we're going to do a spotlight on the TriFaith staff and talk to you about the evolution of inclusiveness and how we as a staff are trying to move the needle on what it means to be part of this inclusive nature. So I'd love you to join us for a conversation with the staff on the 13th of August. And then the other date in August is, let's see if I have that on a piece of paper here. Watch for details. I'll send out an overview of all of them, but a conversation in September with Bishop Barker about the Episcopal Diocese's contribution. Also, the other one in August is some research that we're doing in partnership with UNO. So we're talking about building a curriculum about Jewish, Christian, and Islam that it will launch soon. Some basic course that will be in partnership between UNO and TriFaith, as well as some research that we're doing about religion in the workplace with the industrial psychology department at UNO. So lots of great work, so much more to tell you than we can tell you in any 1 hour. We did put a survey in the chat. It would be great to get your feedback. Thank you all for showing up, especially to my family from across the country who's here today. Thank you to everyone, and please mark October 17th for our virtual grand opening on your calendar. It is an evening event and lots of details to come, but very exciting to have Mike here today. Thank you for your time and talents, for amplifying our voice, and for all you do, even not as a resident of Omaha, to continue our vitality. So thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy the day.